Thank you. I'm going to share with you what I believe is my first introduction into food and culture. And this happened when I first began my career. I was working at a restaurant in Akron, Ohio called RJ's. The owner was a Sicilian immigrant, Ralph Sangianiti. And as I worked at that restaurant, I would find Ralph in the back prep kitchen making Italian sausage on occasion. And so I would visit with him. And before long, I was one of those people that had to help. And he was one of those people that didn't want people standing around. So he welcomed that. So we made sausage. And over time, a pretty short time actually, I learned how to make the sausage, start to finish, grinding it, stuffing it in the casings, and learned all that process from him. And little did I know, I at that time learned the proper way to make sausage, but then I also learned that I was going to be the sausage maker for the restaurant and for all his friends. So at Christmas time, these large Italian families, Catholic families, would come and order lots of food from the restaurant, and 300 or 400 pounds of sausage would be ordered at a time. And that was my job then to do that at the ripe age of 17. So I thought that was an interesting thing. I've only ever wanted to be a chef. In fact, I used to run home from school in grade school so I could watch a talk show at the time called The Merv Griffin Show. And occasionally Merv Griffin would have a chef on there named James Beard, and I thought that guy was fantastic. And James Beard, as we know now, is the father of North American cuisine. He would have been well over 100 years old by now. But on occasion, James Beard would be on there, and I would just be fascinated watching him, listening to him present. And one of the things he said one time was he was sauteing mushrooms, and he added parsley, and Merv asked him why he added parsley, and he said, parsley goes with everything except for ice cream. So I've always kind of held that back. And so I started my career, I've been in the food industry for about 43 years now, working at a white tablecloth Italian restaurant, like I shared. I worked at a small French bistro for a short time. And then I worked for a management company, and they managed probably 20 to 30 hotels. And I worked at one of those hotels. And in doing that work, I was blessed with meeting my wife there, Stacy. And without her support, I probably wouldn't be here today. So I left, after a few years, I left that management company, and I got a job working at the University of Akron. I was one of the chefs for the dining hall there. And we were tasked at times, the catering operation would take on very large events, over 1,000 people. And so I'd be asked to have my kitchen take care of those 1,000 people events. And so that was a lot of fun. And that was my kind of step into catering and getting out of college feeding food service for a little outlet for me. And so I did that for a while, and then I saw this job posting on a website for colleges and universities, and it was Grinnell College. And so I applied. And I took the job eventually after some interviews. And as I was leaving Akron, I was told by one of my bosses there that when you go to Grinnell, that little town in the middle of nowhere in Iowa, you're going to be bored out of your mind. And 23 years later, fast forward, I'm still waiting for that boring day to happen. So please let me know when that comes. So I've been here 23 years. We've done a lot of things here. Some of the other things we've done are just amazing, what we've done in the Joe Rosenfield Center. The student body here, we right now, I think we're right around 1,400 students enrolled. And each day, we're open 7 days a week. Each day for breakfast, we might serve 400 to 500 people for breakfast on average, and then 1,200 for lunch and dinner on average. And if you look at that over the course of an academic year, That's roughly a little bit more than 500,000 meals served. So just a little bit of food. We also have a catering operation, and the catering operation here services a little over 3,000 events a year. And over the course of 23 years, I looked back, we have serviced over 1.5 million customers. So a few people have crossed our doorstep, so to speak. We also have the Spencer Grill and the Global Cafe, serving various things to the student community and the campus community. And then the Grinnell student body is comprised, it's very interesting here, at least one student from every state in the United States, and that includes Alaska and Hawaii. And on average, about 50 different countries are represented here within the student body. And that rises and falls based on, obviously, on enrollment. So my talk today is about food and culture. And my experiences of how food brings people together. When you prepare food for someone or some group, and you focus on the ingredients, the how and the why of how the food is made, and the particular way that it's done, and the traditions that are passed down, you begin to gain a very deep understanding of how personal all this could be. So creating connections with people is in a very different way. Long-lasting impressions that will change how I view food and how foods culturally can begin to be so powerful to people. So I started a few years ago, and I was asked if I could go with the GLP program to Russia, travel to Russia. And if I did that, would I come back and introduce a couple of things in the marketplace? And that seemed like a pretty low bar. So I thought, why not? Let's do this. So we traveled to Russia. And for the class was tasked with reading 4 or 5 textbooks. I thought that was important that I read those too, so I would have a feeling for what was going on in the class, and maybe I would gain some understanding of where I was going and what I was going to be looking at. And so when I left, I had read all the books, and I felt pretty good about Russia as a country and the foodways that I was going to experience. On the first leg of our journey, we arrived in St. Petersburg. This is one of the oldest cities in Russia. And so we visited lots of cool places. I took thousands of pictures while I was there, and all throughout the trip. And each night I would sit down and try and document all the things I saw so I could recreate that at some point. We visited galleries. We visited places that had world-famous works of art from all the artists that you could think of, all the who's of artists. And those were at the Summer Palace and the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg. And of course, along the way, we tried different foods, all try to eat indigenous foods from the area. We traveled from St. Petersburg to Moscow at that point. And we spent time again in galleries. We stopped in Gorky Park, which was very interesting to me. We also visited the Kremlin. And when you go to the Kremlin, you have to be there with a tour guide. You're not allowed to go in there without one. And the tour guide said, as long as you can see sky, you can take a picture. And I thought that was a little strange. Like, why would you say that? And so at the Kremlin, the only buildings you're really allowed to go into are the 5 churches. And inside those churches, there are no photography allowed. So when you could see sky, you could take a picture. So that made sense after I saw somebody get their camera taken away. Also, while we were there, we visited Red Square and a couple of other highlights in Russia. And one of the restaurants I got to visit was a place called White Rabbit. And at the time, White Rabbit was one of the top restaurants in the world. And it was the top restaurant in the world because of the menu. And the chef there had done research and looked at menus from the 1800s and redeveloped them into today's practices. and he built the menu to tell the story of Russian food. And so it was a multi-course menu, and it was just amazing to see all that come together. We also visited a dacha, and a dacha, in layman's terms, is basically a country home. And so we went outside the city limits of Moscow, and we met up with a family there, and we hung out with them for the day, the whole group, and we got to cook with them outside. We made various things. Of course, we made borscht, and we made shashlik, which are meat kebabs that we cooked over a wood fire. And we had a beverage called morse. And the beverage, the morse, is really just a lightly fermented fruit drink that they set out for a couple of days. All that was very cool, and it was very relaxing, that atmosphere. So that's where people would go for the weekend to decompress from the pressures of the city. And we actually did the same thing. We ended up, the group was singing and carrying on, and we had a great time. It was very, very, very pleasant, actually. So once we left there, it was back to the city. From there, we traveled to a place called Irkutsk. And to do that, we boarded a plane that evening. And we flew overnight on a very full plane, stuffed. There was almost no room to breathe, practically. And we arrived in the morning. We landed in the morning. And when we landed, we were then moved on to a bus, and we rode a bus to this restaurant. And that's when we learned that, we're going to get off this bus, and we're going to do a Siberian dumpling making class. And everybody in the group was like, you got to be kidding me. We're exhausted. So we flew all night. We were exhausted from the last few cities, all the events going on, lots of walking, lots of activities happening. And here we are now, just dead exhausted, and we found ourselves in this place, and we had to do this thing. And we decided, we better just do this. Because the payoff was we were going to get to go to the hotel room and sleep for a while. And so, this giant human chef comes out from the kitchen, and he's going to show us how to make these dumplings. And his hands are twice the size of mine. And he has the dexterity in those hands of a sewing machine. And what he was telling us there is that he takes the same ingredients and makes 4 different versions of those dumplings, Siberian dumplings. And one he flattens out so he can pan fry it, one he stands up so he can steam it, and another way he does it so that he can deep fry it. So he does all these different things with just one dumpling. I have his recipe. I still cannot make those dumplings like that. The third picture up there is the actual picture of the exhausted group's pathetic attempts at making dumplings. And what they did is they took our dumplings back to the kitchen and they cooked them for us, blessed them. And then as the food came back out, they also supplemented the food with some of the foods you would experience in Siberia. So that was enlightening to me and very interesting. And then the last picture is a cup of chai. And so here we are. We've traveled thousands and thousands of miles, and we've been up all night, literally, because there was literally no room to even breathe on that plane. And now we're eating dumplings and other things, and we're drinking this cup of chai, and that left an indelible mark on my memory on that cool spring day in Irkutsk, Russia. We then traveled to a place called Lake Baikal, and Lake Baikal is one of the deepest lakes in the world. And at Lake Baikal, we arrived at a lodge. It's like a ski lodge. It was very nice. And for our dinner, we had to make our dinner when we arrived. We were making pelmeni. And pelmeni are little dumplings that look a lot like tortellinis, but only with meat in them. And they're cooked in a broth. And so we had to do that before we could do anything else so that we could have our dinner when we returned back to the chalet, which was pretty cool. So we went down to the lakeside, Lake Baikal. The average temperature was 0 Celsius. It's a very cold lake. And right at the bottom of the lake area there's an open market. And in that open market, you can buy fish to eat. And they have a fish called a omo. And omel is prepared 3 ways there. They hot smoke it, they cold smoke it, or they take it raw and pound it and salt it. The raw pounded and salted is like eating fish jello. Not too great. I much preferred the hot smoke version. So after we left Lake Baikal, then we then headed to our last leg of our journey to Vladivostok. Now, when we started in St. Petersburg, we put our toe in the Baltic Sea, and kind of a ceremonial thing. And then when we landed in Vladivostok, we put our toe in the Sea of Japan. And through that journey, we crossed 8 time zones. And for myself, I logged well over 100 miles of actual walking around cities, seeing the sights and looking around. And while we're in Vladivostok, it's a seaport town. So moored at the marina there are the Russian battleships. There were 5 of them moored there when we were there. And most of the menu is seafood based in the town. So Russian crab, very popular there. Lots of sushi, because you're very close to Japan, Korea. They're all really close there. So we had a really good time there. And then, of course, we had to fly all the way back. And we did that in 2 legs. We flew from Vladivostok all the way back to Moscow, and then from Moscow into Holland, and then from Holland into Detroit. And when we hit terra firma in Detroit, that was a wonderful feeling, I got to tell you. So when we talk about food and culture in Grinnell, I believe it's alive and well. Food and culture in Grinnell, we look at the menus that we're providing for students and for faculty and for staff and for events, and we look at ways to incorporate cultural foods, indigenous ingredients to those cultures as best we can. And anything that will fit, we'll try and make it work. We offered, a long time ago, we started offering steamed buns and a Korean fried chicken steamed bun with house-made kimchi and a little sauce we called afterburner aioli. And we thought, oh my God, there's no way we can make this for the masses, so we'll just serve it at breakfast. And we served it at breakfast for a couple of years, and we were making 300 or 400, and we thought, wow, we're really doing something. And then we took the big step to make them for lunch, and now we make 3,000 of them for lunch. And we do a pork belly one, and we do a Korean fried chicken one, and they're both super popular, so the students love them. So we try and celebrate cultures here in as many ways as possible. And one of those ways is very soon it'll be time for Passover. And we offer, as universal design in the marketplace, the dining hall, Passover acceptable foods. We can't actually produce Passover by law, Jewish dietary law. We can't have Passover food in the dining hall, but we have Passover style. And we're blessed by the rabbi to do that. So everybody can experience that as best they can. We also serve 2 Seder meals, which are the ceremonial meals at the beginning of Passover. So we're going to do 2 days of that this year. We also, one of the stations in our dining hall is called a halal station, and that's Muslim food, proteins that are harvested following Muslim law, basically, and how they're harvested. And those are offered every day, lunch and dinner. We have a robust vegan program. Grinnell College has been serving vegan offerings as far back as the 70s. And somehow I ended up with menus that started clear back in the 70s. And I now have all those menus. So it's interesting to look back. And one of the other speakers here, we were musing about, there used to be a thing on the menu called vegetable mix number 37. And he actually had a band named that while he was at college here. And I have that menu, by the way. We also offer lots of different styles at our walk station. We offer Japanese, Chinese, some Thai dishes, and then things that'll fit as far as East Indian style dishes, we will work them into the walk if we can. And then our pizza station is kind of unique. We have all kinds of different pizzas, but we also have adopted a Neapolitan-style pizza dough that we make from scratch. And then our sauce, all of our sauces are made from scratch. And we try and incorporate local ingredients as best we can. And in all this, with multicultural food, anytime we can incorporate local food to add a little more nuance of flavor or something, and then also provide a sense of place as we do that. So here we have Lugietta Lumani. And Luli works for me. Luli has been here for 5 or 6 years now, I believe. And Luli is Albanian. And Luli is trying her best to teach me how to make baklava. She makes it from scratch, and she rolls the dough, and she uses 2 dowel rods, one larger to get the dough started, and a smaller one to get the dough as thin as she needs to get it to make the baklava. Albanian baklava is very different. It's so a cultural thing here. Greek baklava is loaded with nuts and sugar, and it's doused in syrup with lemon and honey, and it's very sweet. This version of baklava is not as sweet, and it's made with golden figs, walnuts, and a little bit of sugar and a very light syrup. So it's kind of refreshing, and it's also crispy, so it's not mushy sometimes, like sometimes you get with the Greek baklava. So that baklava that you see in that picture will be served very shortly at a reception in the rotunda when this presentation is over. One of the things I'd like to touch back on is the power of food, okay? And the power of food is this. Thinking back to that first Italian sausage bite when I was 17. Thinking about how Luli makes baklava. And she's happy and sad at the same time. And I asked her why. And she said, I'm happy to share because it's part of my culture. But I'm sad because my mom died about a year ago. And I keep hearing her voice telling me how to make the baklava. And so when you taste those things, or you taste something from home that is something you serve at a holiday party or whatever, and it can take you, that food taste can take you immediately back to that spot where you first experienced it, those Siberian dumplings being made and hearing them crackling in the pan. That is the power of food. And I think for me, that is also the power of food and culture.